Tonight, let us drift far to the warm shores of South India, where the sea is restless yet gentle, and the monsoon winds have carried voices for thousands of years. Beneath the swaying palms, fishermen push their wooden boats into the surf, nets heavy with the promise of the ocean. In the distance, the sound of drums echoes through a village, calling its people together under the twilight sky. This land, rich with rain and red earth, gave rise to one of humanity's oldest continuous civilizations, the Dravidians. Long before empires rose in the north, the Dravidians carved canals through fertile fields, planted rice in the flooded paddies, and sang verses that still survive in the ancient Sangam poetry. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of nature, the flood of rivers, the pulse of the sea, the march of the stars above. In their temples, stone gods watched with timeless eyes as people prayed for rain, love, and victory. Yet the Dravidian world was not only gentle, it was a place of kings and warriors, elephants armored in iron, and fleets of ships that carried pepper and pearls across the Indian Ocean to lands as distant as Rome and China. They were builders of kingdoms that rose and fell, each leaving behind songs, sculptures, and stone cities swallowed slowly by vines. As we wander into their story, we will discover how these people shaped the language, faith, and trade of an entire subcontinent. We will see their kings dream of empire, their poets dream of love, and their people endure both glory and hardship. The Dravidians remind us that even in the quiet corners of the world, civilizations rise with the tide and fall like the fading monsoon rains. And so, close your eyes, breathe with the rhythm of the sea, and let us begin the long journey into the history of the Dravidians, an empire of rice fields and ocean winds, of stone temples and whispered poetry. The land of the Dravidians has always belonged to the water. From the western Ghats, rivers tumble down in silver threads, carving valleys through the dark green hills before they reach the fertile plains. In the east, the Bay of Bengal spreads wide, its tides carrying salt into the estuaries, its winds shaping the seasons of life. Each summer, the monsoon arrives like a living spirit, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. For the farmers who bent low in the flooded paddies, it was both the giver and the taker, a reminder that life itself is tied to the rhythm of nature. The earliest Dravidian settlements grew where these rivers fanned into deltas, their waters nourishing the soil until it glowed with rice. Families built huts of thatch and clay, ringed by groves of coconut and plantain. Smoke rose in gentle spirals from their hearths at dusk, mingling with the scent of sesame oil and tamarind. Beneath the banyan trees, children played in the shade, while elders recited stories of gods who danced the universe into being. This was not yet an empire, but it was a civilization rooted in the land, rooted in memory. Archaeology whispers of these beginnings. In the red soils of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, shards of pottery have been unearthed, some painted with symbols that hint at a script, others stained by fire from forgotten kitchens. Beads of carnelian and shell, traded across oceans, reveal that even in these early centuries, Dravidian hands shaped goods that traveled far beyond their villages. They were not isolated farmers, they were already part of a larger world. By the time the northern Indus cities crumbled into silence, the Dravidians were shaping their own legacy. They carved canals to tame the rivers, learning to store water against drought. They domesticated cattle for milk and bullocks for the plough. They raised temples of wood and brick, where priests lit fires to gods who would later evolve into the deities of Hinduism. But what truly defined these early Dravidians was their voice. The Sangam poems, preserved through centuries, sing of love beneath the moon, of warriors leaving for battle, of kings who gave until their hands were empty. In these verses, we hear the heartbeat of a people who celebrated not just conquest, but the human emotions that tie all generations together. Still, there was tension beneath the beauty. The monsoon that gave rice could also destroy it. Villages built too close to rivers sometimes drowned in sudden floods. Crops withered when the rains failed. Hunger and hardship shaped the Dravidian spirit, teaching resilience, patience, and the art of enduring cycles of plenty and loss. And slowly, from this world of farmers and poets, the seeds of kingdoms began to sprout. Families of chiefs rose to power, their names carried in song and inscription. They gathered warriors, built forts of mud and timber, and demanded tribute in grain and pearls. The gentle villages were no longer enough. The age of Dravidian kings was dawning. One day, as the rains broke over the Western Ghats and torrents of water roared into the valleys, a young chieftain stood upon a hill, watching his people labor in the drenched fields. The dream of power stirred in him. He saw that whoever commanded the rivers, the harvest, and the sea routes would command the destiny of this land. It was from such visions that empires are born. And so, the Dravidians began their long ascent from quiet farmers beneath the palms to rulers who would send their ships across oceans. But before that story can unfold, we must first step into the world of their poets and kings and listen to the voices that shaped the South. In the stillness of dawn, when the mist clings to the groves of palm and the cries of birds echo across the backwaters, voices rise in song. They are not merely chants to the gods, nor lullabies for children, but poems recited in the gathering of kings and scholars. This is the Sangam age, when the Dravidian world clothed itself in poetry and memory, and the word became as enduring as stone. According to tradition, 3 great academies of poets Sangams were held in the ancient city of Madurai. Here, in halls lit by oil lamps, scholars debated the rhythm of verse. Warriors listened to songs of their ancestors, and queens wept at lines that spoke of love's fragility. In these gatherings, language itself became sacred, a vessel of history, philosophy, and art. The poems of this era describe a world both intimate and vast. They speak of tender lovers meeting by moonlight, of mothers who mourn their sons gone to war, of kings who open their treasuries to the poor, and of merchants who sailed with pepper and pearls across dangerous seas. Nature was never absent from their verses. The hills, the forests, the seas, the deserts all formed landscapes for the emotions of human life. The Sangam poets divided the world into 5 landscapes, each tied to a mood: mountains for love's union, forests for secrecy, farmland for daily labor, the seashore for longing, and deserts for separation. Through these symbols, they wove a tapestry where the lives of common people were celebrated as much as the deeds of kings. It was a poetry that democratized memory, giving every heart its voice. Yet beyond beauty, the Sangam poems hint at the structure of society. They reveal a world of warrior clans, patron kings, and elaborate rituals of honor. Heroes were praised not only for victory, but for generosity. The ideal king was not the conqueror, but the giver. One verse recalls a ruler who, after winning a battle, emptied his coffers to feed his people until he himself lived with nothing. Such ideals of sacrifice shaped the Dravidian imagination for centuries, but the poems also whisper of conflict. Raids between clans, battles fought over fertile fields, rival chieftains vying for supremacy beneath the rhythm of love and longing. There was always the beat of war drums, even here. However, the poets transformed violence into memory, ensuring that bravery and tragedy alike would not fade into silence. For historians, the Sangam corpus is a treasure chest. It speaks of flourishing trade, with Roman gold coins exchanged for pepper, silk from China, horses from Arabia. It describes ships with tall masts leaving the harbors of Korkai and Muziris, carrying the wealth of the Dravidian coast into the world. Through verse, we glimpse bustling markets, distant voyages, and the first stirrings of kingdoms that would soon dominate South India. Still, one must imagine the human element, a young poet, perhaps no older than 20, standing before a gathering, voice trembling as he recites a new composition. In the audience, a soldier returns from battle, listening for the mention of his clan. A mother, clutching her child, hears her own grief reflected in the lines of a lament. In these moments, the poetry was not an abstraction, it was life, shared and sanctified. The Sangam age gave the Dravidians a cultural foundation that endured long after dynasties vanished. Even today, Tamil literature draws upon its imagery, its rhythms, its symbols of love and loss. The voices of 2,000 years ago still echo in modern speech, reminding us that civilizations are remembered not only by the stones they build, but by the words they leave behind. And yet, poetry alone could not hold kingdoms together. As the centuries passed, the ambitions of rulers grew sharper. The same poets who sang of love also chronicled the rise of mighty dynasties, the Cholas, Cholas, and Pandyas, whose banners would soon fly over temples and ports. From the verses of Sangam halls, we step now into the thunder of drums and the clang of swords. The rains had passed, leaving the rivers swollen and the fields rich with grain. In the villages, farmers stored rice in tall granaries, while in the markets of coastal towns, merchants weighed pearls against Roman gold. From this abundance, ambition was born. By the dawn of the first millennium BCE, the Dravidian world was no longer only a land of poets and farmers. Kings began to dream of crowns. Dynasties took root, and three names would echo for centuries across South India: Chola, Chola, and Pandya. The Cholas ruled the lush Malabar coast, where spice groves scented the air, and the sea brought distant traders to their harbors. Their banners flew over Muziris, a port famed in Roman accounts, where amphorae of wine and olive oil were exchanged for pepper, ivory, and fine textiles. The wealth of this coast filled Chera coffers, funding armies and patronizing poets who praised their generosity. Yet the Cheras were more than merchants. They were warriors who guarded the passes of the Western Ghats and controlled the arteries of trade that linked India to the wider world. To the east, in the fertile Kaveri Delta, the Cholas were rising. Their land was watered by a river that split into countless channels, feeding fields of rice so vast that travelers marveled at the endless green. From this abundance, the Cholas built their power. Their kings maintained disciplined armies, their elephants clad in armor, their warriors trained to move like the floodwaters of the Delta Swift. Unstoppable and devastating, even in the Sangam poems. The Chola kings are remembered as rulers who spread fear like fire across the land. Southward, the Pandyas ruled from Madurai, a city that had become the cultural heart of the Dravidian world. Their kings were patrons of the Sangam assemblies, guardians of poets and philosophers, yet they were also fierce conquerors, wielding spears and chariots in battles that echoed across the plains. The Pandyas controlled fertile lands and southern ports, placing themselves at the crossroads of trade routes that linked the Bay of Bengal to distant islands. Their double fish emblem fluttered on banners above temples and palaces, symbols of both prosperity and power. The three kingdoms were not peaceful neighbors. They clashed for land, for trade, for prestige. Armies marched through forests and across rivers, leaving smoke rising from plundered villages. Battles were fierce but often fleeting. One dynasty ascended, another faltered, then regained strength. For centuries, this cycle repeated, carving into the Dravidian memory a rhythm of rise, rivalry, and resilience. Yet even in their rivalries, the Cheras, Cholas, and Pandyas shaped a shared legacy. They established urban centers where artisans thrived, smiths who worked in bronze, weavers who spun fine cotton, sculptors who carved gods into stone. Their ports connected them to Rome, Egypt, Southeast Asia, and China, weaving the Dravidians into the global networks of the ancient world. Their temples rose as symbols of permanence, stone replacing wood, each dynasty leaving its imprint on the sacred landscape. What is most striking is how deeply these dynasties intertwined power with culture. Kings were not merely remembered for their battles, but for their patronage of poets and their generosity to the poor. To be a great ruler was to give abundantly, to live in harmony with Dharma, and to ensure that prosperity was shared among the people. In this, the Dravidian kingdoms carried forward the ideals first sung in Sangam verse, and still, the winds of ambition blew stronger. As centuries passed, one of these dynasties would rise above the rest, extending its power not only across South India, but across the seas. The Cholas, with their fertile delta and restless spirit, would transform from a regional kingdom into a maritime empire. But before their ships sailed to foreign shores, the land of the Dravidians would witness centuries of rivalry, alliance, and the forging of identities that endure to this day. At dawn, the harbors of the Dravidian coast stirred with life. The smell of salt and fish mingled with the fragrance of pepper drying on mats. Sailors patched sails with thick palm fiber. Merchants shouted prices over the din of the crowd, and elephants hauled bundles of ivory and sandalwood to the quays. Beyond the breakwaters, Ships with high masts waited for the monsoon winds, ready to cross the Indian Ocean. For the Dravidians, the sea was not a barrier, but a highway, a road of salt and stars that bound them to distant worlds. The western ports, such as Muziris on the Malabar coast, became legendary in foreign accounts. Roman writers spoke with awe of the pepper shipped from India, a spice so precious that it was weighed against silver, amphorae of wine, glassware, and coins poured into Dravidian harbors, while cargoes of pearls, cotton, and gems sailed out. The wealth of this exchange transformed villages into bustling towns and kings into powerful rulers. To the east, the Bay of Bengal opened the Dravidian world to Southeast Asia. Ships carried not only goods but also ideas, scripts, stories, and deities traveled with merchants. In the markets of distant kingdoms, Dravidian influence was felt in architecture, language, and ritual. The sea was both commerce and culture, spreading South India's imprint far beyond its shores. The sailors who braved these voyages lived by the monsoon. Each year, they waited for the winds to shift, filling their sails westward toward Arabia and Africa, then eastward, home again. Their knowledge of currents and stars was precise, passed from father to son, recited as verses as steady as the tides. At night, they navigated by constellations, watching Orion rise above the horizon or the Southern Cross point toward their home. Archaeological finds confirm the scale of this maritime world. Roman coins discovered in Tamil Nadu, amphorae unearthed near Kerala, and references in Greek and Egyptian texts all testify to the Dravidian role as middlemen of an oceanic trade. Even the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greek mariner's guide from the 1st century CE, describes Indian ports crowded with ships, their rulers eager to profit from the wealth of the sea. But trade was not without peril. Storms could swallow ships whole. Pirates stalked the sea lanes, and distant alliances sometimes turned to betrayal. Merchants risked everything on each voyage, and yet the rewards were so great that ships continued to set sail year after year. For every vessel lost, another would take its place, carrying with it the dreams of farmers, artisans, and kings whose fortunes depended on the ocean. In the villages, the impact of this trade was felt in subtle ways. A farmer's daughter might wear glass beads from Egypt. A temple might display bronze cast in a style inspired by distant craftsmen. A king's treasury might overflow with foreign gold, allowing him to build monuments of stone that would endure for centuries. Trade was not merely an economic force, it was a cultural tide, reshaping Dravidian society. What bound it all together was trust, the trust between sailor and wind, between merchant and market, between king and sea. The Dravidians became masters of this delicate balance, building a civilization that thrived on exchange. Their harbors were crossroads where the world came together, and their ships were ambassadors of both wealth and culture. Yet as their ships sailed farther, ambitions grew. Kings, who once ruled only land, now sought to command the seas. Among them, one dynasty would rise to turn trade into empire, using fleets not only for commerce but for conquest. The horizon was no longer the limit, it was an invitation. The Kaveri River, broad and patient, split into countless channels across the delta. nourishing a landscape as green as jade. Villages lined its banks, their fields shimmering with rice, their granaries heavy with grain. From this abundance, the Cholas drew their strength. Their kings understood what every farmer knew, that prosperity begins in the soil. Yet they also saw further beyond the fields, beyond the forests, out to the restless sea. It was there, upon the waves, that the Cholas would carve their greatest legacy. By the 9th century CE, the Cholas had risen from a regional dynasty into the dominant power of South India. Their capital at Thanjavur was a city of temples and palaces, its streets alive with processions, its markets filled with goods from every corner of the subcontinent. At the heart of the city stood the great Brihadisvara temple, built of stone so massive it seemed to defy the earth itself. Rising over 200 feet, it was more than a place of worship, it was a statement of permanence, a declaration that the Cholas ruled by divine right. The Chola kings commanded armies that moved with the force of monsoons. Their cavalry thundered across the plains. Their elephants smashed enemy lines, and their infantry fought with discipline and resolve. But what truly set them apart was their mastery of the sea. They built fleets of sturdy ships, crafted from teak and jackwood, their sails billowing like the wings of giant birds. With these fleets, they extended their reach across the Bay of Bengal, transforming trade routes into highways of power. Merchants carried pepper, rice, and textiles eastward, returning with silk from China, spices from the islands, and gold from distant lands. Yet the Cholas did not merely trade, they conquered. Their fleets attacked rival ports, established dominance over the Maldives and Sri Lanka, and projected their power as far as Sumatra and the Straits of Malacca. No other Indian dynasty had commanded the seas with such audacity. For the first time, South India became the heart of a true maritime empire. At the height of their power, under Rajaraja Chola and his son Rajendra I, the Cholas ruled a domain that stretched from the southern tip of India across the seas to Southeast Asia. Rajendra, in particular, was celebrated for leading a naval expedition that reached as far as the Srivijaya Empire in modern Indonesia. The chronicles recall fleets of hundreds of ships crossing the ocean, their prows painted, their decks crowded with warriors. It was a vision of power. Few could rival an Indian dynasty, commanding the very arteries of Asian commerce. But the Cholas were not only conquerors, they were builders, patrons, and dreamers. Their temples remain among the greatest achievements of Indian architecture, sculpted with precision, adorned with bronze icons of gods and dancers, filled with inscriptions that recorded every detail of their reign. In these sanctuaries, art and devotion merged, creating spaces where the divine seemed to breathe. Even today, the bronze figures of Shiva as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, embody the Chola spirit, graceful, powerful, eternal. The Chola administration was equally remarkable. They organized villages into self-governing units, maintained intricate irrigation networks, and taxed trade to fill their treasuries. Their records, inscribed on temple walls, reveal a civilization both complex and pragmatic. They knew that empire could not survive on conquest alone. It required order, justice, and the careful weaving of loyalty. And yet, even at their zenith, shadows lingered. Expansion bred enemies. and distant campaigns strained resources. Rival dynasties, such as the Pandyas and Western Chalukyas, watched for weakness. The very seas that had carried Chola power could also bring storms and invasions. History teaches that empires, like the tides, rise to dazzling heights only to ebb away. Still, for a time, the Cholas embodied the dream of the Dravidian world. They were farmers and sailors, poets and warriors, patrons and conquerors. Their story was not one of isolation, but of connection, tying South India to a vast network of lands and peoples, leaving behind monuments and memories that still shape Tamil identity. And so, as we look eastward across the Bay of Bengal, we see not only ships returning with cargo, but an empire at its height, daring to dream beyond the horizon. Yet every empire, no matter how glorious, must one day face decline. In the chapters ahead, the story of the Dravidians will turn from expansion to challenge, from power to the slow weight of time. The Kaveri Delta still glistened with green fields, and the temples of Thanjavur still towered into the sky. But beneath the grandeur, cracks had begun to spread. Empires rarely fall in a single storm. More often, they erode, grain by grain, like a riverbank carried slowly away by the current. So it was with the Cholas. At their height, the Chola fleets commanded the seas. Their armies swept across South India, and their kings were praised as lords of land and ocean. Yet power demands a price. Campaigns in Sri Lanka drained the treasury, consuming men and elephants in endless cycles of conquest and revolt. Across the seas, the Srivijaya kingdom rose again, threatening the maritime dominance that Rajendra had carved out. In the north, rival dynasties watched and waited, sharpening their spears. The Western Chalukyas, fierce in the Deccan, tested Chola might in repeated wars. Villages along the borderlands became battlegrounds. Fields trampled, temples looted, families displaced. Even when the Cholas emerged victorious, the victories felt fragile, costly in coin, in lives, in time. The once stable empire grew weary under the weight of constant war. Meanwhile, the Pandyas, long overshadowed, began to recover. From their stronghold in Madurai, they challenged Chola authority, rallying allies and reclaiming lands once lost. Their banners, two fishes swimming in eternal motion, rose over forts and temples once ruled by the Chola lion. Each gain for the Pandyas was a wound for the Cholas, and the balance of power began to tilt. Internally, the system that had made the Cholas strong also revealed its limits. Local assemblies, once loyal and efficient, grew bolder, sometimes resisting central authority. Temple inscriptions speak of disputes over land and taxes, of villages refusing tribute, of kings struggling to enforce decrees. The machinery of empire, once smooth, began to grind with friction. The seas, too, grew uncertain. The wealth of maritime trade, which had once flowed into Chola harbors, was increasingly contested. Arab merchants commanded new routes. Southeast Asian kingdoms defended their markets, and China's shifting policies altered the balance of commerce. Fewer foreign coins reached Tamil soil, and with them, The gold that had funded temples and armies dwindled. Yet perhaps the greatest challenge was one of time itself. Dynasties depend on strong rulers, and no line of kings can remain unbroken. After the brilliance of Rajaraja and Rajendra, later, Chola monarchs faced the impossible task of living up to their ancestors. Some were capable, others less so. But the weight of expectation was heavy. As the years passed, the empire felt less like a rising tide and more like a ship drifting against the current. Still, the grandeur of the Chola age did not vanish overnight. Temples continued to rise. Poets continued to write. Ships continued to sail. For the people in villages and towns, life went on. Farmers bent to their rice paddies. Priests lit lamps before the bronze icons. Mothers sang lullabies beneath the rustle of palm leaves. Yet the sense of invincibility was gone. Where once the Cholas had looked across the seas with boundless confidence, now they looked inward, anxious, uncertain. One chronicler wrote of a court where the walls still gleamed with gold, but the voices spoke in hushed tones of defeat and betrayal. Another inscription tells of a Chola king forced to rebuild a temple after enemy raids, a symbol of resilience, but also of vulnerability. The empire that had once seemed eternal now felt mortal, and so the story of the Cholas reached a turning point. Their banners still flew, their elephants still marched, but the shadows lengthened. The western Chalukyas pressed from the north. The Pandyas stirred in the south, and the waves that had once carried victory now seemed to whisper of decline. For centuries, the Dravidian world had known the Cholas as its masters, but history is a restless tide. In the next chapter, we will watch as the sea turns against them, and as rivals rise to claim the mantle of power, the lion would not fall in silence, but it would fall. The city of Madurai stirred as dawn broke over its temples. The stone towers of the Gopurams caught the first light of the sun, their carvings of gods and guardians glowing gold against the sky. In the streets, merchants rolled open their stalls. The scent of jasmine mingled with fresh spices, and pilgrims walked barefoot, carrying offerings of flowers and milk. For centuries, Madurai had been the cultural heart of the Dravidian world. Now, as the Cholas waned, it would once again become the seat of power, the throne of the resurgent Pandyas. The Pandyas were an ancient dynasty, their roots as deep as the Sangam age. Though overshadowed by Chola might for generations, they had never vanished. They bided their time, ruling fragments of land, preserving their traditions, and waiting for the moment when fortune would shift. That moment came in the 13th century, as the Chola Empire faltered under pressure from both within and without. From Madurai, the Pandya kings launched campaigns to reclaim their ancestral lands. Step by step, they pushed back the Cholas, seizing fortresses, controlling ports, and raising their banners of twin fishes over conquered cities. Inscriptions describe the wealth that flowed into their treasuries: pearls from the Gulf of Mannar, spices from the Western Ghats, taxes from fertile rice fields. With each victory, their confidence grew, and their rivals' hold on the south weakened. The Pandyas revived old traditions of patronage. Poets once again found welcome in their courts. Singers composed verses praising their generosity, and temples expanded under their sponsorship. The Madurai Meenakshi Temple, already a sacred site, became an even greater center of devotion and art. Its towering gateways, covered in intricate sculptures, testified not only to faith but to prosperity restored. In this way, the Pandyas sought to embody the ideal of Tamil kingship, protectors of Dharma, givers of wealth, guardians of culture. Yet their rise was not without conflict. The Cholas, though weakened, resisted fiercely. Battles raged across the Kaveri Delta, armies clashing in fields where farmers once tended rice. Villages changed hands again and again, their people caught in the shifting tides of power. At times, it seemed as if the two dynasties might destroy one another entirely, but the momentum was with the Pandyas, and their resurgence could not be stopped. Beyond the south, the Pandyas faced new challenges. The Delhi Sultanate, expanding steadily from the north, sent armies deep into the Deccan. Though distance shielded the Tamil lands for a time, the threat loomed large. The Pandyas knew that to survive, they would need not only warriors but alliances, trade, and the support of their people. They leaned on the wealth of their ports, maintaining ties with traders from Arabia and Southeast Asia, ensuring that gold and goods flowed even as war consumed the land. For the common people, the Pandya revival brought both stability and strain. In Madurai, festivals grew grander, processions filled the streets with music and color, and farmers once again delivered rice and sugarcane to royal granaries. But in the borderlands, life was harder. Fields lay scorched, families displaced, temples damaged in raids. The promise of the Pandya age was prosperity, yet it was prosperity won through struggle. Still, there was a sense of renewal in the air. To many, the Pandyas represented not just another dynasty, but a return to balance. They were heirs of the Sangam tradition, kings of Madurai, guardians of Tamil culture. Their very emblem, the twin fishes, symbolized resilience, swimming together through turbulent waters. For a people long overshadowed by Chola dominance, their rise was both vindication and hope. But history is rarely kind for long. Even as the Pandyas celebrated their victories, the storm clouds of the north gathered. Armies of the Delhi Sultanate would one day march into Tamil lands, shaking the foundations of Pandya power. And in the centuries to come, new forces, the Vijayanagar Empire. European traders would step onto the stage. For now, though, in the 13th century, the Pandyas stood tall. Rulers of the south, their voices echoing once more through the streets of Madurai. The twin fishes swam strong again, yet the sea was changing, and new tides were rising beyond the horizon. The monsoon clouds gathered once more over the land of the Tamils. Rains fell heavy on the rice fields, filling canals and ponds until the earth gleamed like a mirror. In the villages, life seemed eternal. Farmers planting, priests chanting, children running beneath banyan trees. Yet beyond the lush hills and rivers, beyond the safety of the western and eastern Ghats, armies were on the march. From the plains of the north, the power of the Delhi Sultanate pressed steadily southward, bringing with it a storm unlike any the Dravidian world had faced before. For centuries, the kingdoms of South India had clashed among themselves, Chola against Pandya, Chera against Chalukya, These rivalries were fierce but familiar. The invaders from the north were different. Their armies rode with swiftness, cavalry sweeping across the land like desert winds. They carried banners unfamiliar to the south, spoke languages foreign to Tamil ears, and wielded ambitions that stretched across the entire subcontinent. By the late 13th century, the Pandyas, newly resurgent, found themselves confronted with this rising force. The Sultanate's generals marched deep into the Deccan, capturing fortress, demanding tribute, and sending shockwaves through kingdoms that had never before feared Delhi's reach. Chroniclers speak of Pandya armies mobilized in haste, of forts strengthened, of temples fortified in preparation for raids. The first clashes were brutal. Northern cavalry, swift and disciplined, met Dravidian infantry and elephant corps in battles that left fields scorched and villages abandoned. The Pandyas resisted fiercely, sometimes halting the invaders, sometimes yielding ground. Even when they survived, the cost was immense. Granaries emptied to feed armies, treasures melted to pay soldiers, and cities scarred by war. Madurai itself, jewel of the south, felt the weight of invasion. For a time, the Pandya kings held their throne, but the strain grew unbearable. Factions rose within the court. Brothers contested succession, and generals turned into rivals. Weakness within invited pressure without, and soon the unthinkable happened. The armies of the Sultanate seized Madurai. The establishment of the Madurai Sultanate in 1335 marked a turning point. For nearly half a century, the heart of Tamil culture was ruled by outsiders. Temples were taxed heavily, merchants redirected their trade, and villages adjusted to unfamiliar lords. Yet the resilience of the Dravidian spirit endured. Farmers still sowed rice in the monsoon fields. Poets still sang. Though their verses carried the weight of loss, devotion at temples continued, even under the burden of new rulers. For the people, it was a time of uncertainty. Some adapted, trading under the new order. Others resisted, preserving traditions in secret, hiding manuscripts, safeguarding icons of bronze and stone. The Sangam spirit of endurance, the ability to sing of both joy and grief, became a lifeline. But history is never static. By the mid-14th century, new powers emerged to challenge the Sultanate itself. From the north came the Vijayanagar Empire, rising like a wall of granite against Delhi's reach. Their armies, disciplined and determined, swept into Tamil lands, driving out the sultans and reuniting much of the south under a new banner. For the Dravidian kingdoms, this was both salvation and transformation. The Pandyas faded, weakened by division and conquest, while Vijayanagar brought stability and grandeur on a new scale. Temples expanded into vast complexes, their towers climbing higher than ever before. Trade revived, linking once more the harbors of the coast to the roots of the Indian Ocean. Yet something had changed. The age of Chera, Chola, and Pandya dominance was passing. The Dravidian lands would remain vital, rich in culture, strong in tradition, vibrant in commerce, but no longer the undisputed masters of their destiny. Larger forces, empires from beyond their rivers and seas, had entered the stage. Still, in the fields of Tamil Nadu, the old rhythms endured. The rains fell, the rice grew, and the people adapted, as they always had. The memory of ancient kings and poets lingered in stone and song, whispering that even under foreign rule, the Dravidian soul could not be erased. The storm from the north had passed. But another dawn was rising. The Vijayanagar Empire now stood as guardian of the south. And with it came both promise and new challenges, challenges that would again reshape the destiny of the Dravidian world. The sun rose over the rocky hills of the Tungabhadra River, casting long shadows across the ruins and temples of Hampi. In the morning light, granite boulders glowed like embers, and the river flowed calm and steady, as if carrying the memory of countless prayers whispered on its banks. Here, in the 14th century, the Vijayanagar Empire was born a fortress of stone and faith, a shield for the Dravidian south, and a stage for one of India's greatest cultural flowerings. For generations, the Dravidian world had endured storms, wars between dynasties, invasions from the north, and the uncertainty of foreign rule. Vijayanagar arose as an answer to these trials. Founded in 1336 by brothers Harihara and Bukka, the empire declared itself both a political and spiritual protector of the south. Its capital at Hampi became not only a citadel of granite walls and palaces, but also a sanctuary of temples, markets, and learning. The city astonished visitors. Travelers from Persia, Portugal, and beyond described streets alive with merchants, bazaars overflowing with silks, spices, horses, and gems. The scale was vast. Aqueducts brought water to fields. Elephants paraded in royal processions, and towers of temples soared above the cityscape. Hampi was called the City of Victory, but it was also a city of abundance. Under Vijayanagar rule, Dravidian culture entered a new renaissance. Temples expanded into monumental complexes, their gopurams, ornate gateways covered in sculptures of gods, demons, and dancers. The Vitala Temple, with its famous stone chariot, became a symbol of devotion and artistry. Musicians performed in pillared halls, their songs echoing against carved granite. Dancers embodied stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, their movements weaving together myth and prayer. Artisans thrived under royal patronage. Bronze casters continued the Chola tradition of creating exquisite icons, while architects pushed stone into forms of elegance and scale never before imagined. Literature blossomed in multiple languages: Sanskrit, Telugu, Tamil, and Kannada, each celebrating the empire's diversity. Philosophy, too, flourished, as scholars debated Dharma, devotion, and the nature of the divine. Trade remained the lifeblood of the empire. Vijayanagar's ports along both coasts linked the interior to the wider Indian Ocean. Horses arrived from Arabia, silk from China, and precious stones from Sri Lanka. Outward flowed rice, pepper, textiles, and iron. The wealth of this exchange filled the empire's treasuries, funding armies and sustaining temples. For a time, Vijayanagar seemed invincible, a balance of prosperity and devotion, sword and scripture. And yet, at its heart, Vijayanagar was also a guardian. Its rulers saw themselves as protectors of the Dravidian south, defenders of temples threatened during earlier invasions. Inscriptions describe kings who rebuilt shrines, restored rituals, and ensured that gods once silenced by war were worshipped again with full ceremony. Faith and power walked hand in hand, each sustaining the other. But even in this renaissance, shadows lingered. Rival sultanates in the Deccan eyed Vijayanagar with envy and hostility. Battles were fought on borderlands. Alliances shifted, and armies tested one another's strength. The empire's brilliance shone brightest in defiance of these threats. But history teaches that even the brightest flames cast the longest shadows. Still, for the people who lived beneath its temples and towers, Vijayanagar represented renewal. Farmers found stability in their fields. Poets found patrons for their verses. And pilgrims found sanctuaries where devotion soared higher than stone. The empire gave back a sense of identity, reminding the Dravidian world that it was not merely surviving history, it was shaping it. As the 15th century dawned, Vijayanagar stood proud, its walls unbroken, its markets full, its temples radiant. Travelers wrote that it was larger than Rome, richer than Lisbon, more splendid than any city they had seen. For the Dravidian people, it was proof that resilience could flower into greatness, that after storms, a new dawn could rise. Yet beyond the horizon, rival powers gathered. The Bahmani Sultanate and its successor states, strong and ambitious, looked south with restless eyes. The story of Vijayanagar would not end in quiet triumph, but in fire and ruin. Still, before that day came, it gave to the Dravidian world an age of cultural brilliance that even conquest could not erase. The sun set over the rocky plains of the Tungabhadra, its red light casting a glow on temples and broken walls. The river still flowed calm, but its waters reflected ruins where once there had been grandeur. This was the twilight of Vijayanagar, an empire that had risen as guardian of the Dravidian world, and that now stood on the edge of collapse. For 2 centuries, Vijayanagar had been the shield of the south. Its kings ruled vast territories. Its markets brimmed with wealth. Its temples soared above villages and cities. Yet, like the Cholas before them, the empire could not escape the laws of history. Rivals grew stronger, allies grew uncertain, and the balance that had sustained prosperity slowly began to tip. The threat came from the north, from the powerful Deccan sultanates that had long contested the empire's borders. In 1565, the storm broke at the Battle of Talikota. There, the armies of the sultanates, united for a rare moment, met the Vijayanagar host in a clash that shook the land. Chroniclers describe the dust of elephants rising like clouds, the thunder of cavalry charging, and the cries of warriors echoing across the plain. For a time, victory seemed within reach for the empire. Then betrayal struck. Allies turned against them. Confusion spread, and the disciplined lines broke. What followed was devastation. The capital at Hampi was plundered, its palaces burned, its temples desecrated. Foreign travelers who had once praised its beauty now wrote of silence, of empty streets, of ruins stretching for miles. An empire that had seemed eternal collapsed in a single catastrophe, undone not only by the strength of its enemies but by the fragility within. Yet Vijayanagar did not vanish entirely. Successor states carried on fragments of its power, and its cultural legacy remained rooted in stone, song, and memory. The temples still stood, their carvings scarred but not erased. Pilgrims still came to pray. Farmers still worked the fields. Poets still sang of gods and kings. The empire was gone, but the spirit of the Dravidian people endured. In the centuries that followed, new forces entered the stage. Portuguese ships sailed into Dravidian ports, bringing muskets, missionaries, and mercantile ambitions. Dutch, French, and eventually British traders followed, weaving South India into a global network that reshaped economies and societies. Once masters of the seas, the Dravidians now saw foreign sails on their horizons, their fate entangled with empires beyond their shores. And yet, through all these transformations, the memory of the past lived on. The Sangam verses still spoke of love and valor. The Chola bronzes still shimmered in temple light. The towers of Madurai still rose in defiance, covered in vibrant sculptures of gods and demons. The ruins of Hampi whispered of both glory and tragedy, reminders that even in ruin, greatness leaves its trace. For the Dravidian people, history became both a wound and a wellspring. Their languages, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, continued to flourish, each carrying centuries of poetry and philosophy. Their temples remained living centers of faith. Their festivals filled the air with drums, fire, and color. Empires had risen and fallen, but culture endured, binding past and present together in an unbroken thread. Standing among the ruins of Vijayanagar today, one can feel both silence and song. The wind moves through broken pillars. The river glitters in the sun, and the stones themselves seem to remember. They tell of ambition and beauty, of battles lost and faith preserved. They remind us that civilizations, like rivers, may change their course, but never truly vanish. The fall of Vijayanagar closed one chapter of Dravidian history, but it also set the stage for another. Colonial powers would reshape the land. New rulers would come and go. But the soul of the Dravidian world, its poetry, its resilience, its devotion remained. And so, as the sun sinks over the Tungabhadra, we prepare to leave the age of empires and step into the whispers of memory, into the lessons carried across centuries. The story is not finished. In the quiet of night, another voice will rise, the epilogue, where past and present meet, and where the dreams of the Dravidians live on. The night falls softly on the southern coast of India, the monsoon winds quiet, leaving only the steady hush of waves against the shore. Fishermen pull their boats onto the sand, their nets heavy with the last catch of the day. In the villages, oil lamps flicker in doorways, casting warm halos of light against the darkness. It is a scene that could have unfolded 2,000 years ago, when the first Dravidian settlements thrived by rivers and seas. The rhythms of the land endure, even as empires have risen and vanished. We have wandered through their story, from the Sangam poets who sang of love and loss, to the Chola emperors who carved temples and ruled the seas, to the Pandyas who reclaimed Madurai, and finally to the towers of Vijayanagar, where art and devotion reached their zenith before falling to ruin. Each dynasty left behind stones and verses. Each age added another layer to the long memory of the Dravidian South. What remains today is not only ruin but resilience. The Tamil language, oldest of the living tongues, still carries the voices of Sangam poets. The great temples of Thanjavur and Madurai still echo with chants, their gopurams rising like mountains above the plains. The bronzes of the Chola artisans still shimmer with life, their dancers frozen in eternal grace. The ruins of Hampi still sprawl across the Tungabhadra, silent yet eloquent, reminding us of glory and fragility alike. Civilizations do not truly vanish. They transform, leaving their mark in culture, faith, and memory. The Dravidians remind us that history is not only the tale of battles lost and won, but of people enduring, the farmers sowing rice, the poets composing verses, the children laughing beneath banyan trees. In their endurance lies the true legacy of the South. And so, as you drift into sleep, imagine the whisper of the waves against the Malabar shore, the gleam of temples beneath the moon, the rustle of palms in the night wind. Let the voices of poets, kings, and common folk alike weave into your dreams. For though the empires of the Dravidians have passed, their spirit flows still, timeless as the monsoon rains and endless as the sea.